if they think it's okay to raise taxes for the embattled middle class because they're gonna pout if we don't give more money to millionaires, it really is time for the people of America to take up pitchforks.
Okay, a tough political fight coming out right now. Welcome back to Hardball. That was Senator Claire McCaskill from Missouri today, showing the Democrats' frustration, I think, on the vote to extend the Bush tax cuts. Joining me right now is a real leader of the Senate, Illinois Senator Richard Durbin. Mr. Durbin, Senator, thank you so much for joining. And by the way, congratulations on your courageous support for the bipartisan push to try to deal with long-term debt. Let's talk about the current situation now. If you were to be able to control the Congress and all its voting, what's a better vote for you? To show the Republicans don't care about the people who are unemployed and would vote against extension of the jobless benefits right now, up or down, or to get into this question of tax equity in terms of the Bush tax cuts? What's a better fight?
You're talking about a political fight. I'd have to say
that what shows the difference in the parties better?
Well, I think both really demonstrate it. The unemployment really hits home, particularly in a holiday season. You know, Chris, we're at a point now where 2 million Americans are going to lose their unemployment benefits. They're in the process of losing them this month before Christmas, and 127,000 in my state. You know, $300 a week you can hardly live a comfortable life with. Right. And the idea of cutting that off at a time when you're calling for tax cuts for the wealthiest people in America, boy, that's really an Ebenezer Scrooge scenario if I heard one.
Well, why not force the Republicans to go up or down the way that Steny Hoyer did, the leader in the House did? Force them to go up or down on jobless benefits and celebrate that distinction so the public gets it better. Well, I don't think they get it yet.
If they don't come around and make this part of any agreement on taxes, I couldn't agree with you more. I think Steny Hoyer is right. Let's have an up or down vote, and let's let some of these Republicans decide whether or not they want to stand on the side of 8 million people who've lost their jobs through no fault of their own.
Let me ask you about the difficulty of being a leader in dealing with good fiscal policy for America. It seems to me it's easy to be for tax cuts, as you know, Senator, and it's easy to be for spending that's popular. The hardest damn thing in the world is to be for some reasonable balance in the two so that we're not becoming one of those countries like Ireland, unfortunately, or Italy. They're basically bankrupt now. They're in receivership. How do you make the case to the voters that you got to be balanced about this thing? Business people, rich people, average people, get everybody thinking about being reasonable again instead of just a class war of some kind. How do you get that?
You know, it's a good point, but look back in history. You know, when we have really faced crises in America, our leaders, usually the president, have been able to rally the American people with the idea of sharing in the responsibility, sharing in the sacrifice. There's a feeling today that many Americans are exempt. I think some should be because they're so vulnerable and helpless. That's a reality. But many of those folks who want to be exempt from this conversation are very well off. Can you imagine anyone being able to stand up and say, listen, if you make $1 million a year, that's $20,000 a week, you deserve a $100,000 tax cut. For goodness sakes, at this time in our history, with this recession and this deficit, the people who are millionaires ought to be protesting, saying, leave us alone. We're doing quite well, thank you. And this notion that we're demanding additional tax cuts just is unconscionable and unsustainable. So this really, I think, is what we need. A call for shared sacrifice and people to believe that they're part of the solution.
How do the Republicans get away with saying they're in the same boat, that people making millions of dollars a year, billions in some cases, are in the same boat as a woman or man whose combined income is $100,000 or $150,000 a year? I mean, they do it all the time. They always say, let's have no tax increases. Let's have all the Bush tax cuts, as if everybody, they seem to make that case over and over. Boehner's a classic. There he is. He's just a classic at this. He acts like he's looking out for the little guy when, in fact, the only fight here is over whether you're over $250 a year, over $1 million, as your colleague Chuck Schumer's talking about, making the $1 million distinction.
Well, I can tell you we ought to get back to reality and defining what America's really like off of Capitol Hill, where the average salary in America is $60,000 a year or less, where people are falling further and further behind in terms of their purchasing power and the demands on their own personal budgets. We've got to translate this into reality. And let me tell you, members of Congress don't necessarily live in the middle class. We make more money than 95% of Americans. So to say that we're a good barometer of what's going on in the economy is not an accurate statement. I'll tell you one thing, though, that, Chris, you ought to keep in mind. One of the reasons reasons there's such a warped view of the economy is the way we finance campaigns. Members of Congress in both political parties spend an inordinate amount of time around some of the wealthiest people in America who are kind to us and support our campaigns. And we come to believe these are just average Americans. They're good folks. Many of them ask for nothing in return, but they don't represent real America when people are struggling.
Thanks for reminding us of that, where the who pays the piper sets the tune. Thank you very much, Senator Richard Doer. Again, thank you as an American for standing up for balancing the debt or getting rid of the debt down the road. Thanks for joining us tonight.